All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about the First World War, a conflict so huge they originally just called it the Great War. I mean, this thing completely engulfed Europe, reshaped the entire globe, and we're going to unpack exactly how it all went down.
So, to really get a grip on the scale of this, just look at this number. 16 million. That's the estimated number of people who lost their lives. We're talking more than 9 million soldiers and nearly 7 million civilians. It's almost impossible to imagine, but at that point in time, it was by far the deadliest war in human history.
And here's the crazy part. At the time, people were calling it the war to end all wars. Can you believe that? There was this real, desperate hope that something so awful would, shock humanity into never fighting again. But, well, as we're about to see, that hope didn't last long.
Okay, so, part 1, Europe, a powder keg. So, how does something like this even happen? I mean, a war this massive doesn't just pop up overnight. To really get it, you've got to picture Europe in the early 1900s. It was basically a giant powder keg, just waiting for a match.
So what was going on? Well, you had all these competing empires, a ton of old rivalries simmering away, and this intense feeling of nationalism bubbling up everywhere. The big new player on the block was Germany. It had just recently become one unified country, and it was industrializing like crazy. This made the old-school empires, Britain and France, really nervous. Okay, so with all this suspicion flying around, Europe basically split into two big teams. You have the Triple Entente, that's France, Great Britain, and Russia. And on the other side, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, at least at the start. The problem with the setup? It was like a giant tripwire. If one country got into a fight with another, their whole alliance, their whole team was bound to jump in. You can see how a small problem could get very big very fast.
Part 2, the spark in Sarajevo. And yeah, that tripwire, it was about to get tripped. The whole continent was holding its breath, and then it happened, the single event that lit the fuse.
So here's what went down. On June 28, 1914, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, a guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was in Sarajevo with his wife Sophie. A Serbian nationalist stepped out of the crowd and assassinated them, just like that. See, his big idea was to free the Slavic people from Austro-Hungarian control. He had no idea his actions would change the world forever.
And this is where you can literally watch the dominoes fall. It's incredible. So Austria-Hungary's furious, obviously. They get a promise from their ally Germany saying we've got your back, and they declare war on Serbia. Okay, domino 1. But wait, Russia is allied with Serbia, so they start getting their army ready. Domino 2. Germany sees this and declares war on Russia and then on Russia's ally France. Dominoes 3 and 4. Then, to get to France, Germany marches right through neutral Belgium. And that was the last straw for Great Britain. Boom. In a little over a month, the whole system had pulled all of Europe into a massive war.
Part 3. A new kind of war. So now millions of soldiers are on the move, heading into a conflict that was going to be completely different from anything anyone had ever seen before. The reality was about to hit, and it was going to be brutal. It's hard to believe, but at the start, there was this crazy sense of excitement. People really thought it was going to be a short, glorious adventure. You've probably heard the phrase, "It'll be over by Christmas." Soldiers were literally cheered in the streets as they marched off. That idea, that naive idea, was about to be absolutely shattered. So Germany had this plan for a quick victory, right? Blitz through France. But they were stopped at a huge battle called the Battle of the Marne. And after that, everything just ground to a halt. Both sides literally dug into the ground to protect themselves, creating these huge networks of trenches. And that became the symbol of the war, trench warfare. Two armies stuck in ditches, staring at each other across a terrifying piece of ground they called no man's land.
And this is the key thing to understand. This wasn't a war of heroic charges. No, this was an industrial-scale slaughter. New technology made defending a position way more powerful than attacking one. The machine gun, for instance, could mow down hundreds of men in minutes. You had massive artillery guns firing shells day and night. And then came the truly horrific stuff. Poison gas, the first tanks, submarines, all of it turned the battlefield into an absolute meat grinder.
So for years, it was just this horrible stalemate. Millions of lives lost for, what, a few yards of muddy ground? It was awful. But then came 1917. And in that 1 year, two huge, game-changing events happened that would finally break the deadlock and decide who would win this thing.
Okay, so check this out. First, Russia's out. The country basically collapses from the inside out because of the Russian Revolution. They sign a peace treaty with Germany, and boom, the entire Eastern Front is closed. This is great news for Germany, right? But at almost the exact same time, America joins the war. Germany's U-boats had been sinking any ship heading to Britain, including American ones. That, plus a secret telegram they sent to Mexico, was enough to push the U.S. into the fight. So just as Germany gets this huge boost, the Allies get an even bigger one.
So Germany knows the clock is ticking. They launch one last, massive, desperate attack in 1918, trying to win before the full force of the American army arrives. It almost works, but it fails. And then, with all these fresh American soldiers and supplies flooding in, the Allies hit back hard. The German army was just exhausted. They couldn't take it anymore. The front lines collapsed. And finally, on November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the fighting stopped.
Part 4. A world remade. So the fighting is over, but the world that emerges from the smoke is completely different. This war didn't just end, it literally redrew the map of Europe and set the stage for everything that was going to happen for the rest of the century.
I mean, just look at this. The political change is staggering. 4 huge, ancient empires, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian, they're just gone, wiped off the map. And in their place, all these new countries pop up. Places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. The map of Europe was fundamentally changed forever.
All right, so how do you officially end a war this big? With the Treaty of Versailles. But you got to understand, this wasn't a friendly negotiation. This was a peace treaty dictated to Germany, and it was designed to punish them. It made Germany take all the blame for the war, the famous war guilt clause. It forced them to pay massive amounts of money, it dismantled their army, and took away their colonies. The thinking was, let's make Germany so weak it can never, ever do this again.
And here's the final tragic twist. In trying to create a lasting peace, the Treaty of Versailles pretty much guaranteed another war. Forcing Germany to accept all the blame created this deep, burning resentment. And that anger, well, it was the perfect fuel for extremists like Adolf Hitler. It led directly, just 20 years later, to an even bigger world war. So it really makes you think, and this is the question I want to leave you with. How do we make sure that the way we solve today's problems doesn't accidentally become the cause of tomorrow's?